thank you very much for being with us, and we are endeavouring to make this afternoon as kind of useful, user-friendly, informative, informal, but hopefully, ultimately, something that you can at least take one or two things away. We don't want to pretend that we know everything and we're the best. We're not here doing a sales job. Everyone's in a very unique, different situation according to locality, according to role, according to every permutation you can think of, really. But what we've been asked to do is come along, and that's what we're here to do, to talk to you about practical ways in which children and young people's participation can help embed the 9 participation pledges. And I'm Ellie French, who's Head of Participation and Development for Young Devon. And my colleagues are, would you like to introduce you, colleagues?
I think we can do that.
This is Mr. Scott Goodwin, who has been a young person and is still a young person, comparatively. And he's been really instrumental in the young people's group, group in Torbay, which is where the work we're doing predominantly is. But he's also successfully now gained an apprenticeship with Young Devon, so he's moving into a slightly different role. But absolutely instrumental. So he's going to tell us what we're telling you wrong in a minute. And Kate is one of the core members of the team. Take it, Kate.
I can't think of it now, be put on the spot. I work for Young Devon and do a lot of work with Torbay CAMS and help run the participation agenda with the young people, children and families participation work.
So this afternoon very definitely isn't about a sales pitch to tell you how amazing Young Devon is, or that everything in Torbay is fantastic and you must do the same. Not at all. We're coming to share our experiences. We are at the end of our 2nd year with Torbay, and one of the things that we do is the work with Torbay CAMS. Young Devon does a lot of other participation work with other services across the whole of Devon as well. It's an interesting county. Apart from the geography, actually we have 3 different local authorities as well. So the commissioning processes, the CCG boundaries, all of those things are actually fairly unique down in our area, but I'm sure that you have equal challenges and opportunities where you're coming from too. A little bit of a background?
So Young Devon was commissioned by Torbay CAMS 2 years ago, and we're 2 years into a currently three extension, possibly, work plan around children and young people's participation. When we started working with Torbay CAMS, they were really quite behind in terms of where they were at with participation and where they wanted to be with participation, and actually having a collaboration perhaps with someone who is slightly away from the service has been really beneficial. We all know the pressures on clinicians for time, and actually we have slightly more, we're in the advantage of having slightly more time that we can put things in, which from the nodding faces I can understand. We started it off by establishing a group called Have Your Say. At the moment we've got about 7 or 8 members who come every week to a group. The young people are between the ages of 13 and 22, and they've all had an experience or an interest in mental health. They don't all currently use CAMS as service users. Some of them have been through the transition process, so it's really interesting that you get very different expectations and experiences of CAMS. They are really involved in every aspect of the service and have been really embraced by the team at CAMS as kind of a working partner, which is really interesting, and I think has brought quite a lot to CAMS in a way that perhaps wouldn't have been done before. And we've just started looking at family, parent and carer participation, so running a parents forum for parents of current ex-service users and perhaps parents who might have an interest in mental health. And we're looking at running some sibling work alongside the young people's groups with a focus on young people's generic participation, but also looking at what that unique experience is like for a sibling of a young person who has been through the mental health process.
I think one of the interesting things about some of the work that we've done in Torbay, but also more generically, I won't use the word holistically because I got told off for that earlier. What does it mean? What does it mean? is that I think people expect somebody coming in from the voluntary sector to be probably more politically correct, or specifically having hugely high expectations about enabling young people to be in every part of the service. And I don't particularly share that view. I have quite a simple view that we share in the team, which is that actually if you're going to have genuine participation, then you have to be able to fundamentally answer the 5 W's and the 1 H. So you have to be able to genuinely say at every level, whether you're talking about from a young person's perspective, whether you're talking about clinicians, service managers or commissioning, who is it that you want to engage with participation and why, specifically for the task at the time that you're talking about. Because you can't throw a blanket over all young people and expect to get positive and insightful results for every single task. In the same way, we always ask, we challenge when people say they want participation, what does that mean? And I think that has to be really clearly defined. Also for young people and other service users, whatever participation is, it's got to be answering those 6 basic questions. And if you can't justify why you would be involving that particular cohort at that particular time in that particular task, you shouldn't be doing it. So having talked myself out of lots and lots of pieces of work, what we do try and do is make sure that when we are doing it, it's the right piece of work in the right way with the right person for the right reason. And it all has to be fundamentally affirmed with the actions and responses led by young people. And what we often find is there's quite a lot of that, of the who, the why, all of that is now starting to be embedded across services, especially if, like us, you've been involved in the IAPT agenda for some time. But very often it's the full loop that's forgotten. And it's, right, we've defined it, we know it's right, we know young people want to do it, so we'll go and do it ourselves rather than involve the young people we started talking to. Or we'll involve young people and ask them what we think, and then we'll take what they said and go and do something with it and never speak to the young people about that. So the decision making only goes so far, or the involvement only goes so far. So we're really passionate about embedding the final result and how young people are going to be engaged right from the very beginning to the very end result.
When we looked at starting the work at Torbay Camp, and I think this is perhaps something that you will all be completely familiar with, it was about how actually we enable everybody across the service to actively participate in participation. One of the things that we looked at starting was training with young people, because we are asking young people to navigate and explore a world that professionals are quite uncomfortable with. I'm quite daunted standing here talking to you today. You've got more letters after your names than I've had hot dinners, and we're asking young people who perhaps aren't had as much experience as I have, or as many skills that you develop throughout your kind of working life, to do that exact same thing. So the starting point for us really was the child and young person and enabling that, but then it had to be a reciprocal process with other members of the team and above. One of the things that we have struggled with is enabling commissioners, and I think that's something that we're really trying to crack, and it's really difficult because they kind of they exist in a world that is very different to a young person's world, and trying to get them to understand how using young people is kind of value for money and giving them the power to do that. We've been very lucky in Torbay, and I only talk for Torbay because that's my experience, in that the staff have been very, very on board with the decision-making process and the kind of collaborative work. But the young people have also been involved in training the staff around the benefits of participation, both in terms of service transformation, but also therapeutic benefits of being involved in a participation group.
And you know, hopefully we're not teaching people to suck eggs here, and that, you know, we don't want to patronise, but it is about ensuring that the same standards, the same expectations, the same professional courtesies that we would extend to the directors of health, when we have a meeting with them, are extended in the same way to children and young people. Interestingly, what I think is very often forgotten in this framework is the clinicians and the people and the staff in the middle. And we can put an awful lot of work into children and young people and also try and convince the people with the money. And that can be fairly isolating at this level. So one of the things that's really helped us embed IAPT within the Torbay service is by just making sure that there's a continual loop here as well as all the way through the three, because otherwise you can end up with siloed pieces of work. But I'm sure you know that. Tell us to shut up or throw something if you've heard it all before. Well done. Right, different pledges. Just wanted to talk to you a couple of ways that we have in Torbay approached different bits of the different pledges. We've also got a different hat on in Young Devon in that we are leading the IAPT collaborative across the South West Partnership. So we are a service provider with the CAMS work in Torbay, but we are also the participation collaborative lead for the whole of the South West collaborative, which is an interesting dynamic actually, but it does enable us to be able to really work quite sophisticatedly and try and break down some of the barriers and boundaries that lots of commissioners and lots of decision makers are very fond of. Do you want to talk through, Scotty, a couple of the things that we've done in terms of assessment and outcome monitoring?
Yeah, sure. Not that long ago we have started doing mystery shopping within Torbay CAMS. We find it sort of, as our group have your say, it was kind of a necessity to sort of go in, especially because I have not used CAMS for a long time, and seeing what Torbay CAMS is like. So we went in, I went as a 17-year-old with a false persona, and sat there with this whole sort of like script running through my head of this whole, you know, background, and we sat through the process. And we weren't aiming anything directly at any of the practitioners, but we just wanted to see the process of how it was, sort of coming into the CAMS building, transport, parking, you know, the waiting area, going in how you're seen, going into the actual rooms, and then the whole process, what information, what leaflet, and then a couple of us have done that, and then forming that into a report, and then getting that back to the CAMS staff in Torbay. And the Torbay staff seem very open to it, and they all willingly put themselves up to be mystery shopped, which we found fantastic. And we're currently undergoing that report. Yeah, we're currently undergoing that report.
Can I just ask Kate to say something about kind of the ethics of setting up that mystery shopping? Is extremely succinctly demonstrated there by what Scotty's talked about, but I think it's been really kind of pushing the boundaries of how you work with children and young people in even attempting that kind of work, and a service allowing us to perform that kind of role. And do you want to talk about some of the kind of challenges and thought processes?
It was really, really difficult to get it established, and to do that in a way that was beneficial, not only for the service in terms of recommendations, but for the young people as well, and that ultimately would be of benefit to everybody, not just as a kind of token exercise, and could end up in sort of damaging things really. The things that we really struggled with initially were the ethics behind taking an appointment away from somebody who has been on the waiting list for a long time. And actually there was a lot of deliberation about it, and it was felt in the end that taking a small appointment away for something that would ultimately lead to the benefits of all service users, hopefully, if the recommendations are going to be implemented that way, would be the more kind of long-term beneficial thing to do. The other really kind of serious consideration, and I don't know if you can talk about this a bit as well, was about the debriefing afterwards, because that was a really difficult situation for young people to be put in. All our young people who are involved in the group undergo training in lots of different areas, and one of the areas that they are trained in is in assessment processes. So they're not going in completely blind. There was a really big support process around it. I don't know if you kind of talked about that.
Yeah, it was what we came up with. It's very important to have the support before and after the whole assessment. Before, because it's quite a nervous thing. You're going into this appointment not knowing what to expect really, because you're not going for yourself, and which was another thing we didn't want to sort of waste someone's actual appointment if they're going in and it's their own appointment time and then trying to think, oh, I'm trying to assess this. So that's why we also did it as a mystery shop rather than somebody who's already at CAMS going to that appointment and then wasting that time. But going back to the debriefing, it was a necessity to sort of afterwards have a small debrief, just get your mind, get all emotions out, because it's an emotional process and it's quite tiring because you're having to put up this persona and you sort of buy into it because we put a lot of thought and effort into it. So it's really emotional, and having that debriefing initially with a member of staff afterwards, and then also later going back and visiting those clinicians and letting no hard feelings, you know, this is what we got from it, how did you feel, and then getting the feedback from them as well is just very important.
But I think ultimately what's really important is that we set it all up in terms of a learning process, and so we didn't ever expect to get it perfect, neither did we expect there not to be problems or issues that perhaps we hadn't navigated in the right way on that day for that person with that clinician, for example. So there was a whole raft of background work in terms of justifying what clinician, what day, what time, which young person, what the backstory is, all of that, which we won't bore you with. But I think because we were able to approach it as a learning piece of work, and to go and say, so what did work? What have we learned that we wouldn't have gained in a different way? How can we do it next time? And also that real soft bit about how did it feel for the young people, but also the clinicians. It's almost a taboo that, you know, you wouldn't put on a persona or a disguise in a therapeutic environment. And it was a very interesting concept. But we did learn a huge amount, which I think everybody has agreed you wouldn't have necessarily got without doing it. So that's one of the things.
I'm really challenged by that idea. I kind of think it's fantastic, and there's another part of it that really
it's conflicting, isn't it? Yeah.
But what could you give an example of something that you learned from that you think you couldn't have learned?
One of the things that we've learned is about the process, and it was a big conflict for us between taking away someone's actual initial assessment, which I just mentioned, but also by using someone who was going into the assessment, so a regular service user. What we found was that actually by mystery shopping, the young people were able to assess the entire process, so from leaving their house to getting home and how that would feel. Whereas if we had asked someone when they came out of their initial assessment, oh, how was that for you, they may either be thinking throughout their appointment, oh, I have to be thinking about this, or we might take away some of the things that they have picked up in their assessment. I'm hoping that makes sense.
In terms of sort of feedback that we don't normally get, because I think what we normally get is either you're rubbish or you're brilliant. Actually, neither are particularly helpful.
But that real in-depth feedback about what it feels like, the whole process, the journey.
Step by step in our report, we said, this is how we felt at this point, this is how we felt at this point, and we put our pros and cons to that whole thing. So step by step, we are thinking of all these questions that we have gone over before, and we are putting them down in writing, and like none of them are aiming at anyone, and it's literally step by step. This is how I felt. This is how I saw this. This is how I was in that situation, which you don't always get sort of when you're going in for an actual assessment, sort of your personal assessment, because there's other things that you're worrying about and going through your mind. And it's just sort of like, then that's an afterthought when you think, actually, you know, I can't quite, your mind's kind of cloudy when you're thinking back to how your assessment was when you're going in for a real assessment. When you're going in with that goal and that aim, it kind of just clears everything up a little bit.
I think it really means that you can challenge a service objectively, because you are freed of your own personal therapeutic need. You may have other therapeutic needs as a result of doing the mystery shopping, because we talked a lot about, and tell me to shut up if I start saying too much, about, you know, actually feeling guilty about taking someone's appointment, or feeling that you have lied to somebody. You know, all of those kind of things that if we were going into Tesco's mystery shopping, we wouldn't have the same anxiety about. But actually, some of these things, without being cold, we can bring down to a service, a business. And standards and quality. And I think some of the taboo around CAMS can be and should be challenged, actually. I'm not saying that I can give you 100% reason to make you decide one way or another, but it's a very interesting process. And interestingly, both the young people, the managers and the commissioners have all said, keep on, keep doing it, because we learn more than we would have done doing it any other way. So, on to doing the job right. We have been involved in recruitment panels with Young Devon for a really long time. It's something that we do within our own organisation. It's something that we do with every other organisation that we come into contact with. But I think it's not just about the what, or it's not just about the doing, it's the how, really, that's really instrumental in making sure that it's doing it right for young people, with young people as well.
At CAMS, all the young people have 50% voting on all interviews, recruitment. They also have...
We've got the right to veto, or the right to have whatever say we have. We also get to choose our own questions, and we get the option to have our own young people's panel, or be a part of the professional panel, depending on that young person and how they feel more confident.
We're also moving to a situation with service managers and commissioners where actually young people are engaged in beginning to write the job descriptions and deciding what are the roles that are required in the service. So really beginning to embed decision making at every level. We won't patronise you because you can all read, but basically we have accredited training for all young people. What we're also developing and what we're finding more and more is that as an organisation that's got an expertise with young people, not necessarily mental health or special needs, which is what we also work with, or children in care, we have a skill set that we assume professionals who work with young people have that they don't necessarily have. Does that make sense to people? So we're increasingly doing training about how you involve young people, how you engage young people in your service. Because, you know, we take it for granted that because you're a professional working with young people, you know how to do it. Some people don't know how to do it, and they want to, but we're finding that that's probably an aspect of participation that at the moment hasn't been addressed as much as it could be. So that's an interesting development. In terms of running the service well, one of our key areas is commissioning, is that we are fighting at the moment in Year 3, and we are getting towards the point where we're going to have joint commissioning, but recently we have been to strategic networks, we have presented to trusts, we've presented to boards, and like all decision makers, once they get a sniff of success, they're more interested. So now we're at the start of Year 3, definitely going to see more work within the commissioning process. But some of the work with the managers, do you want to go with that one?
Yeah, the young people's group and hopefully the parents group and siblings group will be working closely with the service managers and kind of executive boards and trust boards around Torbay. So the plan for Year 3 is to kind of increase that work and look at increasing the profile of participation as well, more widely. We're very lucky in Torbay that we have service managers who are really on board and really wanting to embed the agenda and are really proactive in enabling young people to have a voice and have that heard. It says on the slide, top-down approach, and that is an example of that, but we're also trying to promote kind of not bottom-up, but
That's right. Yeah, lots of movements here from the 90s. Collaborative working and a joint mission statement is something that's on our list to do twice. One of the things about the mission statement, I think, is that it's quite a challenge to get the semantics and the language right for every audience. So making a mission statement meaningful for commissioners, for service managers, for clinicians and for young people, parents and siblings, is something that's hard to achieve, but means that the process through which you go to enable you to get to the mission statement has a real buy-in from everybody. So that's something we think is really important. And then because it's the graveyard shift, and we didn't want you all sitting there falling asleep, we wanted you to have to do something this afternoon. So we've got a challenge for you. We're going to present you with a list of genuine pieces of a kind of wish list from young people, which we did at a conference with the University of Exeter. Things that young people said would be in their ideal CAMS service. And I'd like you, with people that you're on the table with or on your own, if you feel like being a bit more insular, whatever you like, well, if you wouldn't mind following these instructions, are going to have a look at your list and think about the services that you are working with currently, either at strategic level or at operational level, whatever suits your needs for this afternoon and in terms of taking something forward. And it's a really simple task. We want you to put a star next to the statements that you think, yeah, your service is already doing that and you can demonstrate that pretty well. From the rest of the list that hasn't got a big shiny star next to it, put a tick next to the ones that you think, well, we could meet that if we had a bit of resourcing or a bit of refocusing. It's not too much of a stretch, maybe not there yet, but that's something we could aim for. And where you feel your service is unable to meet these needs, as stated by young people, put a cross next to it. We'll give you about 5 minutes, and then we're going to have a bit of a discussion about that, if that's okay. What we wanted to do was talk about some of the statements, some of the scoring that you've given yourselves, and see a kind of litmus test, really, as in, are these statements the same as the kind that you hear all the time from young people? Or do you hear these statements from young people? Or have you not got any statements yet where you're at? So it's a challenge of how to pitch something, because we've got a lot of different people with lots of different experiences at lots of different stages in the IAPT agenda. You may not have had time to look at the whole list yet, so apologies if I'm moving people on too quickly. But from a service user's perspective, were the ones that you labelled with a star what you would call the obvious? And are you happily confident that you're meeting those already generally? Any comments?
Yeah, I guess a few of them I put stars, but also ticks, because it felt like it depends maybe on who you meet. You know, I hope that I'm doing those things, and confident that I'm, but not necessarily.
Is it embedded? Yeah.
So lots of star stroke tick.
Okay, and I think one of the big lessons from our last 2 years is about that evidence, because if a commissioner asks us, how do we prove it? And you're exactly right. Can you be sure that the same message is coming from the same people across the whole organisation, or every young person, for example? So, are there any that you aren't confident that your services are delivering, that you think are fairly standard across the list? You think, well, most young people would want this or would expect it, but you're not feeling confident that you're delivering it yet? Gosh, I'm asking lots of you to bare your souls here.
Something about the opportunity to find your own therapist potentially is really loaded, because I think we're asking people to work beyond capacity. As it is, and obviously there are some of my staff that are, they're really, really talented, skilled, experienced people. There are other people that kind of lack that confidence, and actually some of them don't even like working people, I think. So I suppose the idea you could end up with one particular therapist who's very dynamic and very appealing, is everybody would want to work with her. And somebody else is left behind. And
I think there's something around going back to my, everyone would expect me as a head of participation to be saying all participation is correct. Also, I would challenge that what all young people ask for needs challenging sometimes too. Young people are not experienced therapists. They are experienced young people in their own experience. And so one of the big messages for participation generically, I think, is to enable young people to make informed choices, but it's the informed bit that we have a duty to do some real work on. So going back to your point about choosing therapists, to enable that process to get to a point where it was even viable would mean us being able to educate and upskill young people at a vulnerable point, to the point where they understood different psychological therapies. And so, you know, once you start to unpack it, you can see that it's perhaps not something that we would want to encourage young people to pursue as a first stage. But then when you actually speak to young people and say, what do you mean when you say, I want to be able to choose my own therapist? Sometimes something as simple as saying, I'd really prefer not to have to come during my school day is actually enough of a move towards feeling in control of a choice about therapy.
Quite a common one is just the sex of the therapist.
Yeah.
That's like what come up a lot in group.
Yeah. So I think one of the messages is that there are some things that young people will request, and very rightly we should listen, but one of our responsibilities in participation is also to kind of mediate and to give information and to unpack what is the thing that they're asking for and how viable is it and what benefit will there be to the young person at the end of the day before you even start to look at impact on services. Okay, so how could you implement any of your tick points? So these are the ones that you think you're nearly there on, or you could be there quite quickly with a bit of extra resource, dirty word, or a little bit of refocusing. Is there anything there that maybe necessarily wasn't in your mind as things to do desperately, that you think actually I could demonstrate that quite quickly and quite easily?
I'll take case studies in the waiting room by young people. We've got a bit of it in some waiting rooms, because we predominantly work out in schools and communities, but we have got the odd waiting rooms, but very much so they've got like books of phrases or book of hope one person's called to actually quotes that's gone through, but maybe he's publishing that a bit more because actually not everyone knows it's there.
And this is our young people's group, so of their wishes. So when you ask your own groups, the young people in your area, they may come out with something different. Okay, so the final bit is, I suppose, a bit more challenging. What are the areas that can't be met? Is that because the young people's requests are unrealistic, or because there's another barrier? And are there different ways to mitigate barriers and meet needs in some way, if not totally?
For us, it's kind of, unfortunately, the practical points that we're not necessarily able to meet. For example, accessible services. So my team is based in a building that's actually been condemned for about 7 years, but the government's not actually given money to move to a new one, so we're still in it. So, for example, we can't see wheelchairs within our building. You physically can't get in our building with one. So we try to meet halfway. So if it's a case that you can't access our building, we'll try and come and see you at your school or at your home, because obviously you can't get to us. But some young people would rather come to us because they don't want us in their schools. They don't want that stigma of us coming to their schools. They don't want us to come to their home because their home is their safe place. They don't want to open the box in their home. But practically, we've tried every idea we can possibly come up with to try and make the building accessible, and it's just not going to happen until they give us a new building. And other things such as sort of being able to choose when you have your appointments. Within reason, we try to make adaptations for that. So quite a lot of our therapists work flexi hours, so they can offer evening appointments. But with a caseload of 30, if all 30 young people want to be seen after school, it ain't going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And practically you can't meet it. You can try and we try and do as many lunchtime sessions. We try and do as many after school sessions. And 1 or 2 of our therapists will work on the weekend. But again, it's when's the building open? When can we practically access and been sort of lone working and sort of safety policies to our staff as well as our young people.
Lots of nods around the room. So it's the kind of practical issues around the things that are not even involved in the session itself and seeing a therapist. Any comments on either of those things?
They're things that we see very often, aren't they? The difference between what young people really want and what's practical and resource is able to be resourced.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know if you agree with Scotty, it's just about having that realistic conversation with people and saying, we would love to be able to make this come,
And everything is just being honest with the young people. You say, actually we physically can't do that, but we'll try and meet your needs as much as we can. They respect that a lot more than saying, no, we can't do that. Or try and say, yeah, we can do that, but you can't meet that need. And that comes across a lot, as the young people just want you to be honest to them, treat them as an equal.
Actually, one of the biggest pieces of learning out of the mystery shopping exercise was really, it seems quite fundamental and quite simple, but there had never been a conversation between young people objectively, not in their own kind of therapeutic environment, and clinicians about waiting lists and the whole perceptions and anxieties from both sides around them. And clinicians were very anxious about the fact that they knew they would see a young person for the first time for an assessment, and then there could be a really long time until they were seen for an appointment. And equally, young people were very anxious about the fact that they were waiting and waiting and waiting. And then there's this whole kind of scenario that exists that we won't need to rehearse because it happens everywhere, no matter what CAMS service or what area you're in, that CAMS is shit, the waiting list is too long, you know, God, they can't get seen by anybody. What was interesting was that when the young people listened to the clinicians about the fact that they had to do a prioritisation, that they had to do X, Y and Z, and the clinicians heard that if young people were told at the time of their assessment there could be something like a 12-week wait before they had a letter, maybe a 4-month wait before they got an appointment, that would be okay. It was the not knowing. And so within about 10 minutes, that conversation dissipated a lot of the anxiety and a lot of the kind of negativity for both sets of people in the room, and enabled us to put something in place in terms of the service about information giving. And what seems a quite simple no-brainer actually gets missed quite often. Now Young Devon have got lots of very practical activities, reports, session outlines, all those kinds of things that we're very happy to share with you, but there's a time of the day as is, we didn't want to go any further. So what we're going to do is ask you to contact us if you'd like any more information or help or support. Scotty hasn't given his details, I'm afraid, so you'll have to go through us. We're acting as his agents if you would like to speak to him. But this should also be circulated after the event by the IAPT Collaborative as well. So we don't want to keep you here longer than necessary. If you've got any questions, please ask. But other than that, please have a really safe journey home. And it's been a pleasure to meet all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.